Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of the Talk-Ons podcast. We're coming back after a tiny hiatus, like usual. And today we're going to be talking about, round one. It's a little bit of a round one playoff reaction, and we're going to talk about the state of the sport. We'll react to round one games. We'll talk about whether or not the 12-team playoff is a good idea. And maybe, along with that, we'll talk about what can possibly be improved with it, if anything needs to be improved. Today we have, Quinn U Nerd and myself, Travis Hunted, or Cam and Chase, as we're also known. So, I guess we can just go ahead and get started. If you don't, his name's pretty obvious. If mine doesn't make sense to you, I just want to go ahead and get it out the way for his sake, because I think that the hatred on Travis Hunter right now is just ridiculously uncalled for. I think everybody needs to be reminded that the Heisman is given, yes, to the best player in college football. But when you hear the word best player in college football, this isn't basketball. You don't just have a Michael Jordan come out here and win 6 championships for you. Your team has to be good too, because there's 22 total players, unlike basketball where there's like 5, and you rotate out those 5 the entire game. It's like there's 22 players and you probably play 30 of them and all.
Football is a team sport.
The fact
Can we
is
stop
that
forgetting this in conversations?
BYU
team sport.
BYU absolutely pummeled Colorado, and it's been nothing but hate on Travis Hunter. And then another thing, we talk about social media, and here we are on a podcast on social media, but the darker side of it and how people think that they have any room to talk about Travis Hunter's relationship and all, just everything is just, they're just dogging on
Personal
Travis
life
Hunter. It's like,
aspects.
what do you have? You don't have anything better to do than to hate on a 21-year-old just trying to live his dream of playing football. More power to you, I guess. But
True that.
so
But that's what his name means.
that's what my name means. Sorry, I had to. I was scrolling through. I'm like trying to look at highlights, see what people have to say about games and stuff, and actually see like debatable topics on football, and all you see is people whining about Travis Hunter's fiance and how, he won the Heisman, but he can't beat BYU. Yeah, because he's not 22 people at once. That's why.
Right.
This is what happens when you play both sides of the ball. They think you are the team. Ridiculous. Anyways, and it's crazy that I'm coming on here and saying this, because I don't know if I've talked about it in the past on other episodes, but my co-host here knows that I always rooted for Junty here until the later part of the season for Heisman, but I was not upset when Travis Hunter won it. I am upset with the way people are treating him afterwards. They're having to
Right.
delete their social media accounts and stuff because of this, and it's like, bro, this is insane. So,
Welcome back. Talk-Ons.
yeah,
Round one
gotta
playoff
rant.
reaction.
Gotta rant right
Got to
away.
get
Okay,
that
sorry. Gotta get
Talk-Ons
the
rant
first
in
little
there.
bit of rant out there, because I've always got something I get irritated about with the general public. Not you
We
guys. If you're
are.
watching this, you're probably a football genius and like pro at life. So
We are.
that is if you finish. If you finish the whole episode, you're a real one, and you know what you're talking about.
And
So
this one is going to be, well, I'm not even going to say it because every time we say it, it doesn't end up happening. So I'm not going to say it.
yeah, don't even mention time frame. We're just gonna go with the flow.
Yeah.
Anyways, to make it faster, let's go ahead and get to everything. So round one reaction. I think we all know kind of where this is going to go with the playoff. You had 4 pretty much just blowouts. They were all blowouts. I mean, Indiana and Notre Dame score-wise was close, but Indiana really didn't put up any points until like late in the fourth quarter.
They got
So,
manhandled, to put it, plainly.
but so what does that mean though? The question is now, okay, Clemson got handled. They kept it the closest, but they still got handled. SMU
I think it
got
would have been closer if they hadn't
Indiana got
lost
handled.
Maffa, but they probably
Agreed.
still would have lost.
Agreed. But so did any of these teams not belong? Is the question that comes with this. It's like, well, SMU got absolutely pummeled. So
first
did
of
they
all,
not
I
belong?
think we need to. I think we need to ask the question: are people being premature about like this like snowflake meltdown reaction to these teams getting blown out. Like everybody's so hyped about the 12 team field, 12 team playoff, and then we get some blowouts, and all of a sudden the world is ending and college football is over, and the NCAA is a failure, the playoffs a failure. Oh, this was a terrible idea. Everybody's like flip flopping their tune because we got some blowouts in the playoffs.
Well, and to that, if you want a counter argument to that, something that I use a lot is like, okay, a team getting blown out in the playoffs, I'm sorry, this is going to sound, everybody's going to say, how does that even make sense as an argument? A team getting blown out in the playoffs is not an indication of whether or not they didn't belong. It just, like, I guess, okay, it can be an indication, but I don't think it's a definite, like, confirmation that they
Well, I
didn't
mean, it's
belong.
like we've talked about before. One game doesn't determine
Well,
like
well,
the team's full like potential and worth through their full body
well,
of
the
work
point
through
I
the
was getting
season.
to
You
with
know,
that was that Bama has been blown out in the playoffs. Michigan, who just won the national championship last season, has been blown out in the playoffs. Clemson has been blown out in the playoffs. Ohio State has been blown out in the
and
playoffs.
those were 4 team
Oregon, or
playoffs.
yeah, no, not Oregon. Florida State was blown out in the playoffs. Not quite like blown out to the degree of these teams. Notre Dame has been blown out in the playoffs, and they just got a blowout in the playoffs. I don't
And that once again was the
It's
four
just one of
team
those things
field.
where I get, it's like prestige. People want to talk about prestige of these teams and stuff. I think we need to look at the playoff this way, where you know what? Let me actually start with this. The argument for, we'll talk about Indiana. Well, I'll bring up Indiana first. Did Indiana belong in the playoffs? Most people would say no. Both good teams they played, they got blown out, or they got manhandled.
I think there's
Okay.
an argument to be
Well,
had
now
there.
let's take a look. Let's take a look at the argument, right? Let's take a look at the argument for Indiana. Let's take look at the argument for like Indiana, why they didn't belong in the playoffs. The argument is that although they're 11-1, they haven't played a single good team, and the one good team they did play, they got beat pretty badly.
Right.
Okay, well on the flip side, the team that beat them, I think the argument still stands. Notre Dame's 11-1. Their only good win is Texas A&M. Sorry, I'm not counting USC. They're not a good team. Don't try and say USC is a good team. They're not. They weren't last year, and people are talking. Oh well, they scheduled USC as one of their good games because like no one thought USC was going to be a good team. They went 7-5 with a Heisman winning quarterback. In what world did we expect USC to be any better this season with
Well,
never lost?
neither well the thing is neither Texas A&M nor USC were really all that good in totality. And I mean, I know what I see what you're getting at. You're pretty much saying like, okay,
Notre Dame and
um,
Indiana were in the same boat. They both
in
had
the same
awful,
they had the
terrible
same
schedules.
resume
They
basically,
had
just the
very
inverse.
similar
The
resumes. The only
inverse.
difference, and here's the thing, people will
Indiana
say,
had a
"Oh,
good
well,"
loss.
I was about to say,
Notre Dame had a
people.
terrible
I've heard
loss.
people use the argument, "Oh, well,
Right.
Notre Dame's got a good win in Texas A&M." Okay, it's not a great win. First off, second of
It's
all,
not that
okay,
good.
that win doesn't matter when you've lost to Northern Illinois. At least Indiana's only loss was against a top 5 team, or
So
well,
both
playoff
well,
caliber team.
and we're not going to dig too much into these two teams, particularly Notre Dame, because we've already had enough talk on Notre
Well,
Dame. But
I'm trying to use the argument. I'm just relaying
but
the
I see
argument is
what you're
that
saying, and
it's all about like I just
both of those teams
there's
were
no reason to
questionable.
leave these teams out. I know
Both of
people want
those
to
teams
say,
were questionable.
I
Yes.
will say
And
it's the
I
flip
mentioned that
side.
before. I was like, "Hey, I would take, I could argue taking out both Notre Dame and
Yeah,
Indiana and replacing it with South Carolina and Ole Miss, or some other teams,
but
that
losses
were
have to matter to some degree.
right.
Um, I do think that a 3-loss South Carolina is probably, to me, I think I would, or maybe a 2-loss South Carolina with their schedule. I would take them definitely over an 11-1 Notre Dame because again, Notre Dame's
If
schedule
they
was
had, if
an
they hadn't
absolute
lost to
flop
Bama,
of
it
a
would have been a
schedule.
whole different story. But
But um, I don't know. I think Indiana belonged in. We've talked about it. I still think they belonged in, even though they got beat. The reason is because we can argue like resume and stuff like this all you want, but like the next best team was a 3-loss SEC team, And I'm sorry, people could say what they want about, like, because I'm an SEC homer sometimes, and that's my argument. Oh, well, they were SEC. That I just don't know. I mean, I believe in giving these teams a chance. I know we're most likely not going to see a Cinderella story happen, especially 3 games in a row in the playoffs. But you know what? Whatever. I just want to see him be given a chance. I will say, as a 12-team playoff fan, as an expanded playoff fan, like, I expected some blowouts to happen. But 2 reasons why. Because, yeah, sometimes letting the Cinderella, quote unquote, Cinderella in the playoffs, there's a good chance they're going to get beat down. Second of all, blowouts can just happen in general. They just do.
They happen in the
You know?
NFL playoffs.
Exactly. I mean, they just do. Bad games
Blowouts
happen in
happen
the
in the
NFL.
NFL, and
It's
that the
just
parody is it's literally professional football. So
so
what like college? Of course, there's going to be blowouts in the playoff. That's a
I just
given.
think my biggest issue right now,
I didn't
and something we
expect
can
it to
get to,
play out the way it did,
is
but
I also think home field advantage plays a way bigger part. I mean, if you guys, I wasn't there, but I saw it and I've watched videos of the atmosphere. There ain't nothing like Happy Valley or the Horseshoe on a playoff night like that, or like a playoff game like that. Home field advantage will make a huge difference there. In SMU's defense, here's another thing: these teams also get used to these playoff games. I think they'll get used. I think SMU just was in for a rude awakening because they
the
haven't
moment was
played.
too big.
They haven't played in an atmosphere like Happy Valley like that. They
Right.
just
I think
haven't.
the moment was what got
I mean,
SMU. The
I mean,
moment was too big
imagine
for them.
already kind of being fairly well outmatched. Because here's the thing: even if you're fairly well outmatched, I think if you come in with a really good game plan, that's how teams like Northern Illinois can pull off upsets. Sometimes you just come in with the best game plan of your
Yeah.
life, and I think that can happen.
The matchup
Such as
factor, yeah.
TCU with Michigan when they beat Michigan, in the playoff game, and then got absolutely destroyed in the uh playoff. TCU, for example, a lot of people said they didn't belong in the playoffs, but I mean, then by that logic, Michigan didn't belong in the playoffs and vice versa, and so forth. Like, it's just a blowout is not fully indicative of a team not belonging in the playoff. So,
Well,
um,
I mean, we've already gotten full. I mean, we've already gotten 4, and I agree with that. Because once again, we look at the full body of work. One-off games happen, blowouts happen, bad matchups. You know, perfect game plans from one team versus another. It's yeah, it doesn't always mean that that team didn't belong per se. Um, I guess it depends on the eye test of what you see in the game and how it plays out. Um, but I guess we'll have to see. We need a better reference point in terms of like Indiana. We'll need a better reference point to see where, like, what Notre Dame does moving forward to better gauge that argument.
right?
Because
Because
I
what are we going
mean,
to say? What are we going to say if Notre
if
Dame
Notre
goes
Dame beats
in and
Georgia,
gets?
then we can't.
Well,
Yeah, we
okay, what are
can't.
we going to say if they get blown out by Georgia? Everybody believes Notre Dame belonged. What if Notre Dame gets blown out by Georgia? Is the argument Notre Dame didn't belong?
Well,
Okay,
and that
well,
yeah, the conversation could go either way. But
you're going to claim they don't
uh,
belong once they get blown out, and that's the idea. I don't agree with that. Even people who believed that Indiana belonged in the playoffs now believe they didn't, and it's like, I disagree. If you believed they were belonged in the playoffs when you did, they did. They just got blown out. It happens.
right, and
Notre
that's what
Dame
I was
Notre
trying to
Dame was
say
just the
earlier.
better matchup, and
Is
that's another thing. Is
everybody
like, matchups matter too.
all the flip flop, from media and the analysts and all this, all the people who were saying Indiana belonged in, and then after the blowout, oh well, it looks like Indiana just didn't belong. Don't do that, because it's as you said. What is indicative of whether you belong in the playoff is your resume, your body of work over the season. Whatever happens after that just means that you ran into a better team in the playoff. You just ran into a better team. And I mean, that's just how it works. Not
Because
all
I'm
teams
sorry,
are
I
created
still
equal in the
believe
playoff. That's
Tennessee.
how it works.
I still believe Tennessee belonged in the playoff 100%. They got
Yeah, that's how
ran,
a
but
playoff works. Not all teams are created equal. I mean, Ohio State, that's a national title contender right there. But I mean, I guess the next question will be, do we think that the quote unquote snubbed teams would have done better? Um,
I don't know. Tennessee was a top tier or pretty high tier SEC team that got in the playoff. I mean, what is it? I think there were 3 SEC teams that were at the helm of like who belonged in. I don't think, I mean, come on. And I'm not going to use the transitive property too much here, but I think we all can agree that Oklahoma was not a great team this season, and they beat the snot out of Alabama. So how am I supposed to believe that Bama's not going to go in there? That's my argument. Who else belonged other than Indiana? Ole Miss, Alabama, South Carolina? Like they all had bad losses. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Uh, like I know wins are important, but losses matter too. That's my thing. It's like everybody was so high on Bama
Well, because
because of that win
the
against Georgia.
consistency of a
Like, oh, well,
team's
they beat
performance is
Georgia, so
important.
they can beat a good team. It's like they can beat a good team, but they can also lose very poorly to a very bad team or pretty bad team.
Well, we've
Like
talked about this before.
same
Is
thing with Ole Miss. They lost in Oxford to Kentucky. So I mean,
well, we've already talked about
at
this
least Indiana's
before.
only loss was to a good team.
And we've already talked about it before, is consistency plays a huge part in that full body of work in the resume. And and we've talked about, like, with these SEC teams that don't do consistently good, but they have the talent on the rosters to, if they come together with the right game plan on the right Saturday, they could beat anybody. But that's the thing, like, you don't I guess you can't argue playoff worthiness based on potential, like the coulda, woulda, shouldas, and I kind of realize that at this point, as much as I've fought for the idea of a team like South Carolina or Ole Miss getting in, consistency is important because consistency of performance
Well,
reflects
that's why I thought South
the
Carolina
team, and
belonged in over both Ole Miss and Alabama, even though they
South
both went head
Carolina was
to
more
head.
consistent, yeah,
The reason
especially in
is because
November.
South
Exactly.
Carolina finished the rest of their season, like the
Right.
last 6 games, undefeated. They finished undefeated. After that Ole Miss loss, they blew down the wall, and they just went and they had a bunch of great games and beat a lot of good teams. Ole Miss ends up losing to Florida late in the season, and Alabama gets crushed by Oklahoma. That was my thing: is that you cannot get crushed by a bad team like that this late in the season and expect me to be high on you, because this is the part of the season where you're supposed to have everything together and you're supposed to be playing your best football. I think we take, I, I just think that South Carolina was just the most consistent here at the end of the season, and I think they were the better looking team at the end of the season, and had just had the better resume at the end of the season. And I know total resume matters, but the only thing that Bama and Ole Miss had over South Carolina were head to head. They didn't. I don't think they had quality of. I don't want to say quality of win because they did have Georgia, but like other than that, like I mean, they also had terrible losses
Well, I
as well.
guess
So
giving these teams like Indiana and Notre Dame the benefit of the doubt for their consistency of performance. I mean, obviously, there's a lot to unpack there because of strength of schedule. And okay, well, if they had this schedule, would they have been quote unquote consistent? And and then of course recruiting and the rosters, the talent on the rosters. Because at the end of the day, I mean, unfortunately, you just have to take that into account. You have to sometimes look at the hypotheticals and the potential, I suppose, because of you got these talent gaps and the gaps in the rosters. And we're going to get into that later in this episode about ideations of how to gauge recruiting classes and talent on the rosters in a playoff selection
here, here,
scenario.
here here's a
So,
here's a thing as well, is like, also same with SMU. Did they belong in? Yes, I think they did. 11 and well, they were 11-2 after they lost the
I mean, they had a good
they're a
resume.
Power Four conference runner up.
And they showed no
You know,
signs of struggle. They showed no signs of struggle against anybody all season. They handled every team they
they
played
struggled
all
against
season.
Clemson, but then they made it look like they belong. I mean, they almost came
But
back, and
Clemson was ACC championship, playoff
I tell you right now,
contending team.
Indiana's
Um,
biggest issue, and I'll say this: I think people need
and I
Indiana's
mean, SMU
biggest
lost to
issue.
BYU by, like, what, 2 points, but that was way early in the season. And BYU's not bad. They're
SMU's
not playoff, but
biggest issue or Indiana's biggest issue by a mile, which really hurt them, which is why I still think that they could have been fine in the playoffs, was special teams. If they would have had better special, their punter couldn't punt it more than 20 yards. Like it was terrible. He shanked the punt almost every single punt. Notre Dame was starting in amazing territory every single drive.
and that's
That
something
killed, and same
important
thing
to
in
gauge.
Indiana. Indiana was starting in way back in their territory. And I know special teams is part of the game, but what I'm saying is, like, I think when you get to a team like Indiana, special teams is just a hard, like, when it comes to recruiting, so special teams is a hard thing to really get right with recruiting.
It's hard
So
to get deep. Like when
yeah,
you're a program like that, it's hard to get as deep and broad with the talent on the roster as teams with more resources and
uh,
prestige and complementary football. It's a team sport, and people forget that all three facets of that team are just as important because yes, the field position battle can make or break a game, can decide a game, So,
I think
but
for a team like SMU, it's just getting used to the environment. They're just not used to playing
I
in
think the moment was just too big.
in
Yeah.
moments like that at all. And I guess maybe that's part of the reason people don't belong. But let the playoff kind of grow and let these teams get in there more and get more used to these environments and stuff. And maybe they'll play better. Here's the thing. With that being said, what my biggest issue with the playoff now is that what blowouts are going to happen, and obviously they're more likely with these quote unquote Cinderella teams, these not great teams that we're trying to push for. But here's the thing. I just first round blowouts are fine, but we're looking at some potential second round blowouts. That's not good. That's not good.
And we know the reason for that, and
You need to get to the point where you're maybe having one blowout max in these second round games.
the later
Where maybe
stages of the playoffs to get
let's
right.
say like our argument against Notre Dame in the past. I think they're a good team, and I've disclosed at that. But let's say like the schedule argument catches up to Notre Dame, right? Oh, they haven't really played anybody big, and oh, they beat Indiana, but Indiana was also like let's say that all the way up to this point they haven't played they're not battle hardened enough to battle Georgia. It's like and they get blown out. That's bound to happen. Just like sometimes if you get two Cinderella teams or whatever against each other in the playoffs, just based on like basic seeding or whatever. But the auto bid thing is so problematic because um yeah, now you've got Arizona State going against Texas, and you and me pushed and thought, we tried to push for the Cinderellas, and maybe we were, we admitted that, in private, and now we'll admit on podcast, we were living in a bit of a pipe dream where it's like we just wanted these teams to go out there and make
Well,
these
we
good
wanted to
games.
believe it. We
We
wanted
wanted
to
to believe
believe
they were
that
good
these
games,
because the
and we're
12
eating
team
crow
playoff
now,
was
but we'll
hype.
respectfully eat crow, and we know, okay, well, we were just being hopeful. We were wrong. And so now we're going to, now that we've been kind of pushed to pessimism, I'm sorry, like the way the first round went, I got no reason to think that it's going to be any different between Texas and Arizona
And
State
we'll
and
right, and we'll touch
Boise
on
State.
like
The
the
point is
whole
Arizona
seating and
State and
auto
Boise
bids.
State should not be in the second round because we don't want first round games. I don't mind first round blowouts, but I sure as heck mind second round blowouts. I this is the portion where the game should be getting better, and like I said, blowouts can happen even against even two good teams, but you're most likely going to get maybe one or two max. You know, there's a chance that 3 out of 4 of these playoff games, second round, can be blowouts. And I'm sorry,
Well,
I'm going
we'll
to say that I think it's funny because I think Notre Dame and Georgia, funny enough, uh, not much of a prediction, but based on the way I think about this, I think it's either going to be a super close game and either team comes out on top on the super. It's a toss up at that point, or if a team gets blown out, I think it's Notre Dame. I don't see Notre Dame blowing out Georgia, but that's a story for another time. The point is that I think a blowout could still happen just because of the fact that Indiana and Notre Dame were both kind of just fed into the playoffs. They were write-ins into the playoff because of their schedule, which again, that's a story for another time
well, I
with
mean, we'll
like
come back to like the seating and auto bids conversation. I guess we should just finish off with the
well, it
first
kind of
point.
we
The
kind of
first
had to
point,
talk about everything like all together
right?
because it's
But
the whole
we'll
playoff.
but
So
I mean, the first and I mean the first point to sum it up is people need to calm down. I guess I'm just going to finish on the
yeah,
first point by saying people need to calm down. It's not a failure. It's not the end of the world because we got some blowouts in the first round of the playoff. Happens in the NFL, happens in every sport. Blowouts happen. Doesn't, and as you said, it does not mean that these teams just absolutely didn't belong
this
because
is also a 2 year
you don't
system. Might
decide who's
add.
in the playoff retrospectively.
This was
So that
experimental
argument is
anyways.
pointless. It's a
And I saw the
pointless
first
argument.
thing,
So
and I'll agree with a fellow analyst. I don't know if I can have the right to call myself an analyst. I'm a armchair analyst, I guess. But anyways, uh,
Professionally unprofessional,
professionally unprofessional.
but objectively
Josh
correct.
Pate, one of my favorite like current big name analysts, he said it. He's like, you know what? To all you people who wanted the 12 team playoff, I'm one of those. You got to expect blowouts. And yeah, I watch college football. Blowouts are going to happen. I was, like I said, we were hopeful that they wouldn't have happened first round, but they did, and that's acceptable for me. You know what? Because then sometimes games like TCU and Michigan happen. You know, it can happen. You can get good playoff games out of a center. It's like, you know, it is what it is. I
And
just
that's the
let them
reality
have.
of
I'm gonna be
it's
real.
just college
Let them have their
football.
moment. But that's what I'm saying. If you're gonna let them have their moment, you're gonna let these Group of Five or non-Power Four conference teams have their moment. Don't let them work for that moment. Let them work for it starting from the first round. Don't let a team like Arizona State or Boise State be in the second round. I just don't think so. And now we'll talk about. I guess that brings us to like, was the 12 team playoff just a bad idea? No, I don't think it was. I think the way it was set up, and we're learning, this is a 2-year system, and hopefully we've learned, and we will learn that an auto bid is not good. Or if you're going to do an auto bid, I'm sorry. I think it should be, this is going to be kind of power conference. What's the word I'm looking for? Like power conference-analyst or whatever. I don't, you're like, I think the
Well,
Power Four
no, I
conferences
see
should
what
get
you're
the
saying.
buys. If you're
No,
gonna
it
give
should be
buys,
based on. Here's the thing. Look, the seeding and the auto bids. I mean, we've already jumped ahead to this topic, so we might as well just talk on it, I guess. The seeding
you
and the
have
auto
to.
bids. It should be based on rankings. Like it should be based on rankings. And I mean, typically by technicality, the top rankings are going to be the best power conference teams. It, the highest ranked conference champion auto bid is bad because not all conferences are created equal. And sometimes things play out to where the champions of these conferences, especially when you're talking Group of Five, are not in the top four teams in the country. And as you said, the best thing to do with teams that programs with less prestige and less established, you know, uh, momentum in college football, more less established presence and ability, as far as we can tell, is they need to work their way up to make the playoff more sensible. They need to work their way up. These guys, these teams, they the seeding should be based on the rankings. Auto bids, I agree. Auto bids are a problem now because of that issue with teams that don't belong in the top four ending up a top four
Or
seed.
if you have
You
like
know,
a conference, a Power Four conference like the ACC that just was weak overall. They were just a weak conference this year. They struggled as a power conference this season. With that auto bid, even with my argument for the Power Four auto bid, you'd get Clemson and a bye. And then, what if Texas and Clemson played in the bye and you get
but
another
would it be fair?
38-24 game?
But would it be fair for there to be no auto bids and the auto seed to
Well,
just be
see,
based on the rankings?
the
Because
problem,
the
the good thing
conference
about the auto bid,
champions, the conference champions still had to play an extra game before getting to the playoffs. So would it be fair for them not to get that buy from the auto bid? That's the conundrum here.
well, no, because then let's say a runner-up makes it to the playoffs as well. Then the runner-up had to play an extra game, and they're having to start from, but I guess maybe that's the point. Is like if you're gonna win your conference game, you get that was the point of it. It makes the decision in the playoff easier to have auto bids, and um it rewards it incentivizes. There we go. It incentivizes teams to win their conference, which
Right.
is important to some degree, but not really when no conference is created equal. And I think it's pretty obvious the SEC and Big Ten are like miles ahead of everybody this season. You know,
I mean, yeah,
so
we've gotten to a point where SEC and Big Ten are just a cut
I mean,
above
what
the rest of the
we're down
conferences.
to, we just had 4 teams fall, right? So now we're down to 8 teams, and I think 5 of the 8 teams are Big Ten and SEC. So, and one's independent. So
I mean, yeah, and arguably at least one other SEC team got snubbed. We could still going back to that argument. We could
I'm going to
make
be real.
arguments
I'm
about
going to make
that,
this
but
argument here, and here it is. And this is what I think is nice about the 12-team playoff, because we've also, you and me have talked about, do we expand it further to 16? And I think now my answer to that, because now I think I see what this playoff, the 12-team playoff, can be for. The 12-team playoff was a good idea because of seasons like last season, right? Where a 12-1 like stacked Georgia team got thrown out and didn't make it in the playoffs. So I think that expanding it was important, because I think what this 12-team playoff allows for, this is why the auto bid shouldn't be a thing. And if you're gonna auto bid, only Power 4 conferences, because we generally can be pretty safe and pretty certain that they're, you may have, like I said, the ACC this season where they fell and they're not very great, but at least Clemson still gave the best fight of every other team in the playoffs. So the thing is you get these Power 4 conferences, they actually get a bid into the playoffs, and we'll see how Arizona State does. We'll see. They're the another Power 4 conference champ. We'll see how they do. If I think if Arizona State can prove that, like, at least being in the Big 12 like winning the Big 12 can put you in prime position for a good game. Also, it'll be a neutral site, so I actually don't think Arizona State and Texas will be as bad as like SMU and Penn State, because it's a neutral site. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe not. We'll see. I'm
well,
sure it'll be mostly Texas fans anyways in the stands, but I digress. Where I was going with that argument is that these teams, like at the 12-team playoff, this first round can just be to weed out who doesn't belong. I know that sounds crazy, but you give the teams that have a middle of the road resume, as in like an 11-1 Indiana, where it's like they look good, you think they belong there because of 11-1. Well, let's give them a shot. They get blown out, they get blown out. If they get in, they get in. If they win, they win. You know what I mean? Like, they'll prove if they belong or not.
the seeding,
And that also
is the
helps
problem.
helps get rid of the people that we were confused. Okay, do they belong? Do they actually belong? It goes ahead and gets rid of them in the first round. I know people want great first round games, but sometimes it's just how college football works. But at least you may get some bad first round games, but at least you're saving those top 6 or 7 teams, such as like last season, that like are really good teams that probably belonged there. You're at least making sure that those teams get in.
Well, I guess that
So,
brings up the question of,
because I'm sorry, people could say what they want to about 9-3 Bama. They would have gotten their crap rocked in the playoffs. I 100% believe that. I think Texas beats up on Bama. Sorry, even though they
well,
beat
I
Georgia and
think
Georgia beat the transitive property. I think Texas is a better matchup for Bama than Georgia was.
Well, I guess at that brings us to the question about like the old format versus the new, because a lot of people are always talking about like, oh, we should have just kept the 4-team playoff. Oh, a 4-team playoff was better, blah blah blah. And I mean, as we just said before, there were blowouts in the 4-team playoff. So the argument is between top blue blood programs. So it's like
Exactly.
the argument there is dead. And like you said, the other point to the argument against the idea that the 4-team playoff was better is that with a 4-team playoff, you're much more likely for teams that deserve to be in the playoff to be left out. But I guess that goes into the question of, okay, so we expand the playoff. Was 12 teams too much? Like, okay, we had more than 4 playoff worthy teams last season as an example of why we needed expansion, and playoff worthy teams got left out of the playoffs. But, why not expand it to 6 with a top 2 team auto buy, or expand it to 8? Why 12? Do we think that, which 12 is, to me 12 is satisfying because you get the top 10 in, and then like the two outside the top 10, the next two best teams outside the top 10, at large. It's like, it's satisfying in a numbers game.
I think if
But
you get the top 8, maybe
the
you drop
question
it down to
is, will
and you get,
there,
but
like,
you're still going to get blowouts in the top 8. Sorry, you just are.
and we're 12 teams too much to the point where it's like the question, as some people have already asked, will there ever be a time when there are 12 teams in college football all at once that are playoff worthy or title contender worthy? So
maybe my argument for like Penn State and SMU, that there's just the environment being too much for SMU. Maybe this 12-team playoff continues and it continues to go like it is, and then it blossoms because these teams get used to it, or
well,
maybe recruiting picks up.
don't forget about the
Verity,
key catalysts here that we have, which are problematic in many ways for the whole of college football. But in terms of a 12-team field, like playoff, expanded playoff, the NIL and transfer portal really add a lot of potential for increased parity and balance to allow an expanded playoff to work.
here's the
But
thing.
potentially.
Here's the thing. I think um it's funny because if you want to make this playoff to where all 12 teams are probably, they probably belong there, and it's very certain, because here's another issue, because this is always the argument, and this is the heart. This argument is so arbitrary too. Schedule arguments are so arbitrary. They just are. They always will be, always will, because teams lose to teams that they shouldn't lose to, and teams beat teams that they shouldn't beat, and then that
The
throws
transitive win
everything for
loss,
a loop. It throws it
transitive
like
win
Bama
loss
losing to
argument is a
Oklahoma,
fallacy,
because
doesn't work.
guess what? I thought Bama would have been a. I agree that Bama, had they went 10-2, boom, definitely should be in the playoffs. But when you get blown out by Oklahoma, it throws everything under the water. But then some people still believe, oh well, they still got that potential. Okay, but they lost. Bad. The thing is just, what do you do when you have schedules like this? You
Well,
can't compare Indiana's.
they have the potential to win, but they also have the potential to lose bad,
That's why
which
it's
I
so
mean,
hard, because
I guess
everybody
any
wants to,
team does,
because
but
everybody wants to talk about strength of record, strength of this, strength of this. How do you know strength of record truly? Again, okay, well, you know, Georgia beat Bama. Okay, well, Georgia got blown out by Ole Miss. So are they as good as they think? Oh, but then they beat Texas, one of the best teams in the country right now. Oh, so blah blah. What happens? You cannot. So many crazy things happen in college football that a schedule just doesn't make sense. The only way a schedule is going to make sense is, I hate to say it, is if we do the super conference thing, where then everybody's just playing everybody, because then you know for a fact who's probably the better team. Same thing with Texas. It's
and
like
I was
Texas could be argued against because of their lackluster SEC schedule, and they're in the one of in the top. Well, I'd say probably SEC's kind of riding at second place right now, just logically, because they have the second most teams in the playoff right now. They're not doing too well in the bowl
well, I
games,
mean,
but
they're
that's a
well,
story
I
for another
guess there's a
time.
lot to unpack there in terms of arguments of best conferences. Because to me, when we talk about the best conference, like having more like playoff teams that doesn't necessarily make you the better conference, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
but
I feel like there's a balance factor, like, okay, well, the conference that has the most good teams and the most balance of competition is the best gauge for strength of schedule and resume and who the best conference is, the most well-rounded. I'll put it this way. The Big Ten had more playoff worthy teams this season, I'll admit that, but well, I'm not counting out Tennessee just because of that, but we already talked about that. So that's I think maybe it's neck and neck between SEC and Big Ten, but I
well,
think
my,
the
my
SEC is
argument
the
is that
most.
they just have the most teams staying, like, currently in the playoffs. Their
Right,
team,
and I mean
they're
the
they,
SEC.
and
I think the SEC
they're
is
one
the
and zero against the Big Ten, right, or against the SEC in the playoffs. So,
and
but
I think the SEC is the most well-rounded conference. If we're talking
yeah, I
about
mean,
from
I
the top
agree,
down to the
like
bottom,
top
but
down, because like
and we'll
Big
give the
Ten
Big Ten
has one
their
of the
flowers
fattest
this season.
drop offs ever from Penn State. But
But
uh,
we'll just say,
I just it just
and I mean that brings up.
conferences are just so different, that you just string, like, schedule is such a difficult thing, because
Well,
look
it's
at Indiana.
the
I
it's
mean, the 11-1, yeah, but then argument against Bama. Oh, well, Bama's 9-3, but they're in a better conference. It's like, yeah, but like, I just don't like you. Okay, but they're 9-3. They've lost 3 times, and they
but
got
that's
blown out by
and
it.
at the
Like,
end of the day, and at the end of the day, I guess we all know, we can agree that the Big Ten and the SEC are like a cut above the rest of the conferences, and the Big Ten just kind of looks better right now in terms of playoff contention with their top teams. Um, But in any case, we're starting at the gap has been made, and we're starting to come to this moment with an expanded playoff, with the conundrum and strength of schedule arguments, strength of record arguments, because there's so much variation between these conferences. Even in the Power Four, there's so much variation of talent and ability in teams and competition between these conferences, particularly SEC and Big Ten, set apart from the ACC and the Big 12. Gauging these schedules, gauging the strength of schedule and strength of record is near logically impossible. So
Maybe you got to start
this
doing some
brings
math
us
with 5 stars or something. Take 4 and 5 stars, add up the total 4 and 5 stars that
well,
a
now
team's
wait,
played, and then
because
start
this
doing
is where
some
we get
division
into
with
the
wins and
question.
losses and stuff.
This is where we get into the question, and we talked about it before, something that I don't think anybody really wants to see, and we don't really want to see it because the conferences, regional rivalries, conference tradition, regional competition, traditional college football is great, and we don't really want to see that go. But I feel like we've come to this point where we realize the only way to make a 12 team, the only way to make this expanded playoff work for D1 football, um, maybe, and I'm saying maybe, as you said, the two amalgamate it
The
all
super
into two super
conferences, yeah.
conferences, because then it's going to be very hard to end up in a situation where you can't figure out what the strength of schedules really are and strength of records, because you've got the two best conferences. You got it you've only got two conferences, and everybody, as you said, everybody's playing just about everybody. The
Well, and you get rid of the
the
idea of
cross
like,
section of
okay,
competition is more
and then you get rid of
balanced.
a team like Indiana per se, like, oh well, what like do they belong there? Okay, sure. I'm sorry, Indiana, you'll be going 6-6 the rest of your history as a team, but you know what? It prevents stuff like this from happening. Again,
Well, be
I
careful
still
now.
think
We don't know that for sure, but that's a good point. Is it could potentially,
well,
with
that's
that
well, what I'm
the two
saying.
super
What
conference,
I'm saying is
could
that
weed
if
out
that is the
like
case, it will weed it out no
right.
matter what because you're gonna have to play the big dogs in
It could
regular
prevent
season no
those
matter what.
yeah, it could prevent uh those right in easy schedules that make teams that may not be that guy look like
And
something they're
then,
not.
me
So
being, and a fan of the SEC, although never mind the Georgia Tech hat. I'm just a Georgia Tech alum, but I'm actually a born and raised Georgia fan. But anyway, so Tech, and also, come on, SEC and Big Ten going head to head every year would be kind of crazy.
I mean, we
So,
don't want to see like the regional rivalries are really cool. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess program rivalries people still care more about, and that's still more deep and important, like specific program rivalries.
okay, well now you're just
But
taking
like,
you're taking Georgia Tech and Georgia, clean old fashioned hate. Now it's a conference rivalry because it used to be at one point. So,
and the question, and yeah, it could create a lot more. It could actually, it takes away from regional conference rivalries, but yeah, like you said, it could add more to like true blue program rivalries, and maybe that's
well, what do you
better
argue
because
it takes away from
conference
regional conference rivalries? Because now instead of like like if like let's say Iowa and Iowa State, I'm just going to use them because like they're Big Ten or no, they're two different conferences. Now you're just making them the same conference, so the game matters even more because now they're fighting for conference positioning. So like
Yeah, I
just
suppose so. That's a good
I don't
point.
think it takes away from regional rivalries because it's still a regional rivalry. It's still based in the
Now, what
state.
about like
That's what creates the hate. Is that I'm trying to be the best team in this state. That's what I'm trying to do.
right?
So
I mean, I don't. I guess the idea, and I guess it's fearful like traditionalism that makes people instantly write it off. I guess if we really talk through it, maybe the super conferences won't be that bad, and even will make a lot of college football tradition like maybe bolster a lot of it. I guess with points that you made. And I guess at the end of the day, the point here is like, would that fix, like, would that set up a
would it?
better
I don't know.
12 team field? Would that fix the issues of telling who's who? Because as I said before, it is almost impossible with the difference in competition between these conferences, it is almost impossible to gauge what strength of schedule really means and who really has
Exactly.
a harder schedule, a better resume. Because at the end of the day, Arizona State's got a top four bid. Boise State, they have a top four bid. Both of these teams have top four auto bids. But, you know, as I said, it's hard to argue, but sometimes it's not, depending on like specific teams. And Arizona State and Boise State, their strength of schedule, like it's just not it, man. Like Boise State, I mean, they both are good teams. They're great teams, but it's like it's hard to make an argument for their strength of schedule and resume because it's really not there. Boise State's best argument is a good loss to Oregon, which I'm not saying there's no such thing as a good loss. I think who you play and how you play them, whether you win or lose, is an important thing to take into account, especially if they're a top team in the country. But it's like maybe we need the super conferences. Maybe the only
Maybe.
way the 12-team playoff improves and balances out is
The
with the
biggest
super
question with
conferences.
the super conference, though, is that what is that going to do for these other schools, these smaller schools? If they become a part of these big conferences,
Yeah,
does that
do
help
they get
them?
pushed away?
Do they get
That's
money?
right.
Are they going to get more money, or is it just not going to make any difference for those teams?
Well, being I will
All
say
because
being in the super conference, they will most likely get more money. Although I guess the question is, if there's a set amount of money and you add more teams, double the teams, you split that money up even more. Are they really going to end up getting any
well, I mean,
more
the more
money than
teams
the
they
ones that
have,
don't?
the more ticket sales that the conference will
But
be a
yeah, also
part of
revenue
and
would
stuff. So
increase.
it's like revenue is going to increase no matter what because you're just going to have more schools under your conference. So maybe it helps them, and maybe because we've always talked about like that's an argument for these teams for these recruits. It's like, hey, you come play in the Big Ten. Hey, you come play in the
Yeah,
SEC.
and it could, and yeah, like
Oh,
you said,
maybe
it
that
could help their recruiting. It
maybe
could,
though it may not. It may
it
not
could.
change the bottleneck at all, but maybe it could.
Well, at the end of the day, I think what's program bias and blue blood like influence
Yeah, it's always
still
going to stay
rules
there. But
recruiting
I think the
because
point is that
all the kids want to go to the Georgias, the
yeah,
Ohio States, the Alabamas,
the point is
the
that
Michigans.
it'll at least really weed out like this whole issue with like who belongs. So again, I actually still think that the 12-team playoff minus auto bids is fine. If teams get blown out, they get blown out. It'll just make it evident. Okay, well, we now know who didn't belong in at all. And we'll just and hey, now we know for a fact who belongs. Hey, at least we didn't leave out Texas or whatever because Texas would have gotten left out of the top four this season. So but I think Texas belongs in the playoffs. They do. They got an elite defense and they belong in the playoffs, but they wouldn't have been in the playoffs if we kept top four. You see what I'm saying? So it's like
Right.
the argument against the top four is that okay, Texas isn't going to be. Granted, I guess Arizona State and Boise State getting the bid, like I guess again that changes the top five. I guess
We
Texas
will
probably would
see,
have made top four
and we will
if
see
it was
what happens
different.
with those teams. We're not going to make any predictions in this episode, but we will see what happens. I have a good feeling of what's going to happen, but
Well,
we'll
let's think about
see.
this argument as well, because let's say Georgia won their conference. I'm sure an 11-2 conference champ Georgia gets in the top four, right? Well, let's say you definitely got Oregon in. They're still going to stay number one. You'd probably get Georgia in. They'd probably be number two or around there. You got to get Penn State in because they're the Big Ten runner-up and they're 11-2. What about Ohio State? They would have been 10-2, but they look like they belong in the playoffs. And then you got Texas now. You see what I'm saying? It's like you got to expand the playoff for a season like this. We got 5 teams that you're
Well,
certain
right, right,
belong in
right.
the playoffs, and one of them was going to get snubbed. Well, now they're not getting snubbed, so
And
expansion is
obviously we needed
necessary.
and obviously we needed like expansion. I don't think there's any like real good argument for these people that are claiming, they're pretending that the 4-team playoff was better. It wasn't, because teams that deserve to be there were getting left out, and teams that were getting in still getting blown
Because
out. So
Ohio
it's like,
State is
where's
a
your argument for
fantastic
that?
team this year, and I think they 100% have a shot at the playoff, or at the championship. And what hurt them though was a rivalry game. Just one of those one-off rivalry games that happens. But they would have gotten left out in the top four. Ohio State probably would have gotten left out of the top four after that loss to Michigan. I think
And
that's
I've
pretty
heard
evident.
arguments, and this is not something we really have to feed into too much because I don't think too many people believe this for real. But there's a lot of people claiming that we might as well go back to the BCS because at least we got better, championship matchups with the BCS. And well, first of all, no, that was not always true whatsoever, because remember that
There were
time
blowouts in the
Alabama and
BCS.
Notre Dame got put together?
Exactly.
And yeah, we all remember what happened there. And the actual national championship matchup happened to be the SEC championship that year between Alabama and Georgia. But anyway, I digress. Um, the thing about the BCS is
Oklahoma's
even if you
blown
get a
out a
bet
team in the BCS before that
right, but
happened.
even if you don't get a blowout or not blowout, the problem with the BCS is that even if you get, it doesn't matter whether you get a good game or a blowout, either way, you don't really know for sure whether those two teams were absolutely, matter of fact, the best two teams in the country with the BCS. A computer made that decision based on stats and numbers. That doesn't tell the whole story. We've already talked about that. So even with the BCS, you may not get the two best teams in the country with that system. And it's happened before. It's happened where we got one of the best teams and one that didn't belong there. It's happened where maybe we could make the argument we got two teams that were not the two national title deserving competitors, because of the BCS like system. But the point is every this narrative about the 12 team playoff being a bust is so premature. We're not even done. We're not even in
Yeah.
the second round yet. We're not even in the
Well,
second round yet.
another argument against the
And this
BCS
is the
is
first ever, it's the first ever 12 team playoff. Calm down.
another
We'll
argument
see where
against the
this
BCS is
goes.
that when you have
But
a season like 2007, the BCS gets completely just it blows up. The BCS like
yeah,
system blows up.
discombobulated,
So
because the BCS only works when you have those teams that are just so statistically and record wise set apart from the rest that the BCS can make a concrete decision on what the best teams are. But right, when you have a lot of parity in the season and the performances, then the BCS is a little less reliable. Then there's a little bit of, it becomes numerical stat bias, but anyway, the point
well,
is the 12 team playoff was not a bad idea. Expanding the playoff most certainly was the good idea and not a bad idea whatsoever. And I
yeah.
don't think 12 spots is too much. I don't,
I
because
think you stick between if they want to change it, I think you change the auto bids, um, or I think you change the auto bids no matter what. But I
the
don't see a
seeding, yeah,
necessarily an issue with dropping to 8 teams. Don't go over 12. I don't think you go over 12, but don't go. I don't think you go
well,
under 8.
that depends. Because if we get the super conferences, if we get the two super conferences, do we then have an argument for a
That's
16
different
team
though.
playoff?
We're not at super conferences right now, so I think
Well, yeah. So
in the state of
where
the
we're
sport
at now, I
currently, where
agree.
we're at, I think you stay at
Right.
12 or 8. I think so.
See what you did there.
That's pretty much. I think that's pretty much all I got to say about the playoff.
I mean, I think we've made our points. I mean, I think we can agree that, yeah, 12 team playoff expansion wasn't a bad idea. We Nobody can say that for sure. Everybody calm down. Let's just go with the flow, see what happens. This may be a good thing, because like you said, Travis Hunted, at the end of the day, no matter what, you're going to get all of the playoff worthy teams in, and that was the biggest goal, because we had an issue with the 4 team field where you
I'd rather
either
have some blowouts and make
made
sure every team that deserves to get in gets in than maybe have some decent
not every
playoff games,
team.
yet still sometimes have bad playoff games, and then not every
Well,
team
that's
gets in.
another thing, because as we said before, is even with a 4 team playoff, you could have the wrong decisions. The committee can make the wrong
Exactly.
decisions, and a team that deserved to get in more than one of the 4 that got in doesn't get in. And not
If you
only do
the
you get a
thing is,
blowout, but you get a team that didn't belong
yeah,
in there
here's the
per,
difference here with a 12-team
argument.
playoff with an expanded playoff like this. The difference is that even if people want to argue that, oh well, all the power lies within the top 7 or top 8, it's like give the little guys a chance. Maybe something happens. If it doesn't, no matter what, you are guaranteed it's going to work itself out. You're going
Right.
to get the best teams.
It's
You
not
just are.
hurting. Well, that's it's what is it hurting? It's like if you get the best teams in the country guaranteed in the playoff, what is the 12 team field hurting?
I mean, you're just getting bad
It's
games
only
that
it.
people didn't want to see, I guess. But
Well, you don't know that until it happens, because at the end of the day, we want to give these programs, the idea is to give more of college football access to the big stage to see what happens and enjoy, the potential of college football. I mean, yes, this
right.
was disappointing first round, but, calm down. This doesn't mean it's going to happen every single time. Now, I will say as we talked about a second ago, the biggest issue probably is the seeding, the ranking, and how they do the auto bids. If
Yeah,
there is one thing to fix, that's probably it. I
auto
believe
bid, seeding,
that the
or
seeding,
reseeding after each like round or something. Because yeah, it's like someone said, it's like Texas is about to have the easiest road. Penn State's about to have the easiest road to the semis of all time. Both those teams are just going to waltz into the semis probably.
right? Even
So,
reseeding, and I didn't even think about that. Like reseeding is not a bad idea. So I
because
believe the I believe the
I mean,
real
look at
guys.
Oregon. Look at what Oregon has to do. Oregon's going to have to play. Oregon's going to have to play probably. They're going to play. They're going to have to rematch Ohio State, and then they're going to have to play Texas to get into the championship. And they're the Big Ten champion. Penn State though has to play. Um, Penn State has to play SMU, then Boise State, and then maybe yeah, then they're going to play a Georgia who doesn't have their starting quarterback and Notre Dame. Like they have the easier path than Oregon. Yeah, Oregon won their beat them to win the conference. So seeding is an
And
issue.
that's the funny thing.
So
We talked about they all talked about rewarding conference champions. Where's the reward here? The conference
right,
champions got the harder pathways,
you get a
you know.
bye,
So it's
but
like,
you get a bye, but a game like Penn State and SMU, that was just a that was a day of practice for Penn State. So it's
right,
like
it's what it looked
no
like.
matter what, they
The
got there and
seating
they played
definitely
at
needs to be
home too.
fixed.
So it's not like they had to travel or whatever. Penn State played at home. So they got to just stay home and play a practice game. So
I think that yeah, we can agree the seating has been the biggest issue with this first
yeah,
expanded playoff, and we definitely need a better way to set up the seating, like, and reseat. I think reseating, after every round is not a bad idea, but also maybe we get rid of the auto bids for the conference
yeah.
champions and we just focus on rankings. Okay, top four teams based on the rankings alone, whoever the top four teams are, when it's time to make the selection, they're the top four seeds that get the bye, because at the end of the day, if you're in the top four, I mean, you most likely belong there. Because, like I mentioned before, yeah, it's so hard to gauge who's who with the cross section problems of conference competition and stuff like that. But
What are people gonna say? What are
the
people gonna
top
say when
four,
we get
like the
what
top
happens if
four to six
semifinals
teams,
has two blowouts or something? What if the semifinals are blowouts? Then what are we gonna do? What if the championship itself is a blowout? Then what are we gonna do? I mean, like
I mean, it
college football.
happens. It happens. It's college football. It's football. Periods. It's sports. Blowouts happen. Even in the
Because
NFL, even in
football,
professional. So it's like,
because matchups matter too. What if we just end up getting a bad matchup in the playoff?
yeah.
Because I think that's what it was. It's like TCU was a good matchup for Michigan, but they were the worst possible matchup for Georgia.
But the top
So,
four, like the top four teams, top six teams, those are usually obvious. Like the top four best teams in the
yeah.
country are typically the obvious choices, like the obvious elites. So I feel like it's more reliable to lean on. Okay, the top four ranked teams, when it's come time for playoff selection, get the top four seeds. Just transition, just a linear transition from that. Because the auto bids, like, I know they're trying to find a way to balance out like conference championships and extra games and stuff, but it just I don't know. We may just need to go to the Super League. I mean, that may just fix all of those issues, but because then you could
You know
have
what? How about this? How
the
about what
top
we do
two,
is
the winners, the conference champions of the two super leagues. You get the top two seed by. Well, then again, you'd have to change the number
what
though,
about this? What if
because
after this, the
yeah,
2 years here, we decide to keep the 12-team playoff, but we just go to regular seeding where you just seed it based on good teams? What if we go 3 seasons straight, right, of seeding at 12, and the playoff committee they just make decisions? Let's say we go 3 seasons straight of that, and then all 3 seasons, the top four are the only they win all their games. They're always the ones that go to the final rounds. Then it's like, do you go back to the 14 playoff? Because then it just means the playoff committee was right 3 seasons in a row, and the top four, and the top
no, I
four are
don't
just going to
think
be the
so.
best no matter what. But I don't think that's going to happen. Like I
I don't
100%
think
believe
that's
that if
going to
Georgia
happen.
would, I 100% believe that if Georgia would have been like if they would have like had first two bye and Georgia goes to the playoffs last season, Georgia makes it to the Natty. I believe that. I really do. Florida State maybe
I
not
think
because they
most
lost their
people
starting
do,
quarterback, but
but
But anyways, that's all I have to say about the college football playoff. I think we're pushing that hour mark. It's probably a good idea to go ahead and I think call the episode here. I think we got everything out we
Yeah.
needed to about
So
the
I mean,
playoff.
this is your professionally unprofessional but objectively correct take on our reaction to the round one of the playoffs and the whole conversation around it. Calm down, folks. It's football. Um,
And leave
but yeah,
Travis
I mean,
alone.
leave Travis alone. Um, anyway, yeah, I guess we'll just wrap it up here. I mean,
Yep.
I think we got all our yapping out for the
Yep.
day. If you
Once
stayed this
again,
long, you're a real
yep,
one. You're an objectively correct expert. Um, and yeah, this has been the Talk-Ons.
it has
Thank you for
indeed.
watching. Hit that subscribe if you want to hear more yapping for an hour long about college
There you
football.
go.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yep. And
Let
I'll say it too.
me
Thanks for
use my.
watching. What?
This has been Quinn, you nerd, and Travis Hunted. Thank you for watching.
Leave him alone.
Leave